What's going on with y'all boys, man? It's Kymanijb back with another video, man. Hold on. We hit 500 subs, nigga. We hit 500 subs, nigga. Come on, we hit 500 subs. First of all, thank you for me. I put in a lot of hard work. I wouldn't have been here without the JB fam. Give a round of applause to the JB fam, man. Oh my goodness. Without y'all, it wouldn't be possible. Motherfuckers acting like, I hit 1 million, but look, we gotta start somewhere. This is just the beginning. There will be more videos, more bangers to come. Make sure y'all hit that sub button. We are on the road to 600 subs. Round of applause. On the road to 600 subs. Make sure y'all hit that sub button. In today's video, we have the largest nuclear disasters in history. Let's get into this good enough video.
Way towards the largest nuclear disasters on the list. Number 8, the SL-1 reactor explosion. On January 3rd, 1961, at the National Reactor Testing Station near Idaho Falls, Idaho, a deadly radioactive explosion occurred, killing 3 men. It all began at 9 p.m. 3 military operators were on duty at the United States Army Experimental Nuclear Reactor, known as SL-1, when one of the men pulled out the reactor's central control rod. It caused the reactor to go from fully shut down to prompt critical.
Whoa.
You see, when the control rods are inserted into a nuclear reactor, they absorb the majority of neutrons, completely stopping the nuclear chain reaction. The more the—
I'm not gonna lie, when he said that, I have no idea what the fuck he's talking about. Word. Nigga just said no electrons and neutrons and protons. Nigga, huh?
They absorb the majority of neutrons, completely stopping the nuclear chain reaction. The more the rods are removed, the fewer neutrons are absorbed, and the rate of fission reaction increases, creating more and more energy. I guess you can think of the control rods as the gas pedal to the nuclear reactor. So when one of the men completely removed the central control rod, it caused the reactor to produce so much energy that the water inside of the reactor began to overheat and expand, venting radioactive steam from the top of the reactor vessel.
So it's just hot water. Oh my gosh.
Few moments later, the vessel violently exploded. One man was thrown into the air and impaled and pinned to the ceiling, while the other 2 men were fatally injured by the blast. Now, thankfully, the majority of the radiation from the explosion was contained inside of the building, which made cleaning up the disaster a lot easier.
Okay.
However,
first of all,
it still
can we look at this background?
Inside of the building, which—
Can we look at this back? We have a crash out dummy drinking some elixir. We have some stick figures. He's dead. He's dead. He's hitting that ground. He's dead. What is going on in this?
Made cleaning up the disaster a lot easier. However, it still took about 14 months to fully decontaminate the area, with all the radioactive material being buried deep underground nearby. As for the 3 men who tragically lost their lives, they were each placed in lead-lined caskets inside a metal vault and then encased in concrete. To this day, no one knows exactly why the control rod was removed from the reactor. However, the most common theory suggests that one of the men's wives was having an affair with his coworker, and instead of crying and begging him to stop like a real man, he simply pulled the control rod instead.
So he said, since you're messing with my girl, I'm gonna go ahead and crash out and kill all of us. No, that is a crash out right there. That is D1 crash out. Holy.
Successfully avoiding a potentially awkward conversation. Number 7, the Tokaimura criticality accident. On September 30th, 1999 in Japan, 3 workers at the Japan Nuclear Fuel Conversion Company decided to take a shortcut while preparing uranium-enriched fuel. This fateful decision not only cost 2 of them their lives, but also endangered hundreds of innocent people. It all began when the 3 men skipped several key safety steps to meet shipping deadlines, accidentally mixing 7 times the limit of uranyl nitrate into the mix, as well as using uranium that was enriched to 18.8%, which was much higher than the 3 to 5% that was needed. This led to an uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction, as the men were met with a bright blue burst of light, which released a significant amount of deadly radiation. As the radiation alarms began to go off in the building, all of the workers on shift quickly began to evacuate. But sadly, 56 workers and around 667 first responders and nearby residents were all exposed to high levels of radiation. It would be several months before the site was fully cleaned and deemed safe. The power plant was shut down after the incident and remains closed to this day. As far as the 3 men who were preparing the uranium-enriched fuel, 2 of the men died shortly afterward due to radiation exposure, while the last man who survived was charged with negligence. In the end, the company responsible for the nuclear disaster ended up paying around $121 million in compensation to the nearby residents and business owners affected by the incident. Number 6. The 3 Mile Island accident.
Get real-world experience for the world of music and audio.
Damn, shut the fuck up.
Widely regarded as the worst nuclear disaster in the US is the 3 Mile Island accident. On March 28, 1979, at 4 a.m. near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, a reactor began to release radioactive gases and iodine into the environment. But the situation inside the nuclear power plant was much worse. The reactor was quickly overheating, leading to a partial meltdown of the reactor. This was caused by operator errors and equipment failures. Now, surprisingly, only a minimal amount of radioactive gas was released, but that wouldn't stop people from breaking out into a complete panic. I guess when you're woken up in the middle of the night by police sirens and fire trucks instructing you to shut your windows and remain indoors, will do that to you. As people began to panic, they quickly rushed to their TVs to check the news. And since nuclear disasters were somewhat new, many terrifying theories began to spread. Like when they said that the nuclear core was burning so hot that it just might burn a hole through the entire Earth.
What?
Which was both lazy and unoriginal, since they were just repeating the plot of the movie China Syndrome. So in a time of panic, naturally, people began to look at officials for guidance and reassurance. Thankfully, later that day, the vice president of the company that owned the power plant went on TV to answer questions. When asked what they were doing to solve the issue,
He scared the man. That's a scary looking motherfucker, bro. Holy shit.
he responded with, "I don't know why we need to tell you each and everything that we do." Which, of course, is always a great way to put people at ease.
Wait, what?
I don't know why we need to tell you each and everything that we do.
Damn, so he's basically saying, mind your fucking business, my nigga. If I kill a whole bunch of people, mind your business.
Which, of course, is always a great way to put people at ease. This disaster would spark the anti-nuclear movement of the 1970s and 1980s, and would lead to massive reform in the way nuclear power plants would be built in the future. Now, thankfully, the entire area was cleaned up by 1993, and there have been no fatalities linked to this disaster. Well, at least none that they're claiming responsibility for.
Damn.
Number 5. The Windscale Fire. The Windscale Fire was the deadliest nuclear disaster in the UK's history. On October 10th, 1957, at the Windscale nuclear reactor facility in the UK, a dangerous and radioactive fire broke out due to a failure of the temperature control system, which caused the reactor's core to overheat and the uranium fuel cartridges to rupture. As the fire began to grow in size, the operating crew attempted to fight the fire, first by turning up the fans and running them at maximum speed, which only fed the flames and made the situation much worse. Then they tried pouring liquid carbon dioxide on the flames, which had no effect. They then tried pouring water on the fire. Yeah, that didn't work either.
What?
It wasn't until they turned the fans off completely that the water was able to slowly cool down the fire, a process that would take 3 entire days. During that time, the fire emitted radioactive material into the atmosphere, around 20,000 curies of iodine-131, as well as 594 curies of cassium-137, and 320...
What does that mean, good enough? I don't know what the means.
24,000 curies of xenon-133, all of which spread across parts of the UK and Europe. While this was all going on, no nearby towns were ever evacuated or even warned, as the British government made sure to censor all reports pertaining to the disaster because they believed that such a negative story would affect a nuclear power deal with the US. It would take another 30 years for the truth to finally come out, but for 100 to 240 people, the truth would come too late, as they died of cancer as a result of the fire. Number 4. The Kymanijb disaster. The Kymanijb disaster would hold the title for the deadliest nuclear disaster in history. Well, at least for a few years. This is perhaps the most disgusting entry on the list, simply because of how terribly built the nuclear plant was, as it had been constructed as fast as humanly possible. Another reason why it was so disgusting was the way that they dealt with the radioactive nuclear waste. You see, all nuclear waste was just dumped into the nearby river, which took it downstream past many villages before settling in Lake Kizilstash. Once that lake was completely destroyed, they began dumping the waste in the next nearest lake, Lake Karachay, successfully making it the most polluted place on Earth. Today, if you were to stand on its shore for just 30 minutes, you would die of radiation exposure. But now that you have a rough idea of how this operation was run, let's talk about the actual nuclear disaster. On September 29th, 1957, at the Mayak plant in the Soviet Union, an explosion the size of around 70 tons of TNT occurred. The explosion was ignited within a 27-foot deep cooling container used to store nuclear waste. The cooling system on the container was designed to prevent something like this from happening, but it had failed a few days prior and was never fixed. So when the nuclear material began to heat up, it eventually caught fire and exploded, sending nuclear waste flying in all directions, including into the nearby city. The radioactive smoke from the fire would also travel northeast, crossing many villages, towns, and cities. And of course, like the nuclear disaster before, no one was warned or evacuated. Because you guessed it, the government wanted to keep the nuclear disaster a secret. And since secrecy was a top priority, many locals died from radiation sickness, which only took a few days to kill. With bodies piling up, the cities, towns, and villages were eventually evacuated. But get this, when the locals asked why they were being removed from their homes, they were told it was for no reason at all. And it wouldn't be until another 2 years later that the truth would finally be revealed. But sadly, by then, 270,000 people were estimated to have been affected by the radioactive contamination that was released from the disaster.
Like, what you mean affected?
Number 3, the Santa Susana Field Laboratory disaster. On July 13th, 1959, the worst nuclear disaster in American history took place. Now, the truly terrifying part is that if you were a local living in the area, you would have had no idea, as it was kept completely secret. And it wouldn't be until 20 years after the disaster that the truth would finally be exposed. The Santa Susana Field Laboratory was operated by NASA, Boeing, and the US Department of Energy, and it is located only a few miles away from Los Angeles, California, a city with a population of around 3.8 million people. It all began on July 1959, when one of the experimental nuclear reactors began to overheat, so the operators quickly lowered the control rods into the core to stop the reaction. But it didn't work. As pressure was quickly building, the operators were forced to release radioactive gases into the air to relieve the pressure. It's estimated that over 13,000 curies of iodine-131 and 2,600 curies of cesium-137 were released.
Y'all don't know nothing about the iodine and the shits, man. Y'all know nothing about
gas would then have traveled with the wind before settling onto the Earth. For perspective, the 3 Mile Island nuclear disaster released 17 curies of iodine-131 and no cesium. Now here's the terrifying part that will make your stomach turn. Iodine-131 has a half-life of 8 days, while cesium-137 has a half-life of 30 years. And since the disaster went unreported for 20 years, locals living in the area would have unknowingly been exposed to it, leading to many of them, including children, sadly seeing an increase in rare cancers. But it doesn't end there. It was later discovered that 4 out of the 10 nuclear reactors had previously had incidents. There was even a crew of 27 men that regularly burned radioactive sodium in pits, which obviously produced smoke that would travel long distances. Out of the 27 men who worked on that crew, 22 of them sadly died of cancers. There have been many documentaries made exposing this cover-up, like the one produced by MSNBC called In the Dark of the Valley, which will leave you feeling sick. Today, the plant remains closed, and the cleanup of the contamination is ongoing. Number 2. The Fukushima Daiichi disaster. The Fukushima Daiichi disaster was one of the worst nuclear disasters in history, and it couldn't have happened at a worse time. On March 11, 2011, Japan was hit with multiple disasters, beginning with a 9.0 earthquake that violently shook the country. But this was just the beginning. 30 minutes later, a massive tsunami also hit Japan, destroying their electrical power systems. Now, if this wasn't bad enough, soon after the power went down, one of Japan's largest largest nuclear plant reactors began to overheat, and with no electricity, the cooling system could not operate. The 3 reactors on site turned into ticking time bombs. The first reactor exploded the following day on March 12th, with the next reactor exploding on March 14th, then another on March 15th. The nuclear disaster was categorized as a level 7 on the International Nuclear Event Scale, the highest and most severe rating, due to the vast amount of radioactive material released. Now, surprisingly, only 1 person died in direct connection to radiation exposure. But perhaps the bigger tragedy was the 165,000 people who were displaced due to the incident, as they were not allowed to return or were too scared to return home. Number 1, the Chernobyl disaster. I mean, we all saw this one coming. Chernobyl is easily the largest and deadliest nuclear disaster in history, and it's not even close. On April 26, 1986, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near Pripyat, Ukraine, an explosion occurred that forever changed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. The disaster occurred while operators were running a test, which included removing the majority of the control rods, causing the water in the reactor to overheat. They also lost control of the cooling system, causing extreme pressures inside the reactor. Eventually, at 1:23 a.m., the reactor exploded, sending the largest amount of radioactive smoke and gases into the atmosphere, the equivalent of around 400 Hiroshima atomic bombs. Hundreds of first responders were sent to the explosion site to fight the fire. Most showed up in basic gear as they were unaware of the radiation, and sadly, around 28 of those first responders died in the following days or weeks from radiation sickness. Now, some of the firefighters were familiar with the plant and were aware of the radiation risk, but seeing that the fire was spreading across the roof and making its way to the rest of the nuclear reactors, they chose to enter the site anyway, knowing that it would more than likely cost them their lives. In the coming days, it would take over 600...
They better than me, nigga, word too. They better than me. That means we going home for the day? I mean, them niggas keep dying. I'm not going in there. Man.
1,000 people, including firefighters, plant workers, military personnel, and volunteers to extinguish the fire and clean up the site. An operation that took an entire 10 days. Today, the site remains one of the most radioactive places on Earth. And for those of you that have never watched the show Chernobyl, well, I highly recommend you do. It really highlights all the...
If that's the point, because I swear I've heard of that before, bro. I gotta watch
you that have never watched the show Chernobyl,
I gotta watch this, bro. Yeah, say no more.
Well, I highly recommend you do. It really highlights all the brave and selfless people who stepped up to help, even when it was certain that it would cost them their lives.
That's real. Hey, that's real nigga activity. All right, y'all boys, I'm gonna see y'all in the next video. I appreciate all the love and support, man. We hit 500 subs, on the road to 600 subs, man. I love y'all boys. Y'all boys stay safe. Peace, man.